Christopher Hitchens was literally a journalistic star, and he deserved that, every bit of it. The way he picked his issues, spoke against the powerful people in power who abused it, whether it's politics or religion, and the way he articulated his ideas and criticism of the powerful people, it was brilliant. And on top of that, the kind of humor he had, it captivated everybody. Which is the reason that although he offended a lot of people, people actually laughed at that and didn't take much of that offense because it was presented with such originality, wit, and style. He's written numerous books, and particularly two of them are quite popular. One is called God is Not Great, which is when he wrote as an atheist star. He has written and spoken about all the religions quite a bit. And the other one is called Hitch 22, which is more about his own life. But at the same time, I would recommend you to read his writings on different authors such as George Orwell, and Orwell in particular. The kind of insights Hitchens gives to you about Orwell is quite brilliant. So today, while we are talking about Christopher Hitchens, I'm going to talk about his one particular book, which is called The Missionary Position. And if you have any kind of ideas in your head, the subtitle will spoil it for you, which says Mother Teresa in Theory and Practice, which gives you a very clear idea what the book is about. And in a very detailed manner and objectively, Hitchens picks certain events out of Mother Teresa's life, and particularly the ones in Calcutta, India, and then he criticizes them. And he makes a strong case against her. That was she really a saint, a good person? Did she do a lot of good towards humanity? Or did she do something wrong or something bad? These are really difficult questions to ask, particularly when you're talking about somebody who's won the Nobel Peace Prize. But Hitchens undertook this project and he published his writings on this subject, this book, in 1995. So I'm going to give you a brief idea about what this book is all about. And this is really a short work, so it won't take much of your time. And in any case, if you're going to read it or whether you're not reading it, you can always listen to the remaining part of this podcast. So here we go. So Hitchens starts his book by talking about miracles. He says that he's heard at that time a lot of praises about Mother Teresa, particularly in 1980s and 90s, but he had never heard about any of the miracles. And then he says he came across this book by Malcolm Muggeridge. The book is called Something Beautiful for God. And there he finds some interesting evidence of these so-called miracles. So he talks about this BBC documentary which led to this claim of miracles, and he presents this account of Ken Macmillan, who was part of this documentary. So this is how the account goes. During Something Beautiful for God, which is the documentary, there was an episode where we were taken to a building that Mother Teresa called the House of the Dying. Peter Schaeffer, the director, said, well, it's very dark in here. Do you think we can get something? And we had just taken delivery at the BBC of some new film made by Kodak, which we hadn't had time to test before we left. So I said to Peter, well, we may as well have a go. So we shot it. And when we got back several weeks later, a month or two later, we are sitting in the Rushes Theatre at Ealing Studios, and eventually came up the shots of the house of the dying. And it was surprising. You could see every detail. And I said, that's amazing, that's extraordinary. And I was going to go on to say, 3 cheers for Kodak. I didn't get a chance to say that though, because Malcolm, sitting in the front row, spun round and said, it's divine light. It's Mother Teresa. You'll find that it's divine light, old boy. And 3 or 4 days later, I found I was being phoned by journalists from London newspapers who were saying things like, we hear you've just come back from India with Malcolm Muggeridge and you were the witness of that miracle. And so a star was born, and that's how the fame spread. Of course, he is not insisting that that's how Mother Teresa became famous, but he says that there were stories of miracles that were quite popular among her followers. In the same book, Muggeridge talks about his interview, his conversation with Mother Teresa, and there are certain difficult conversations. One of them was about population control, which was a big problem in India. The population was growing, it is still growing. And Mother Teresa opposed any kind of checks on population. So Muggeridge asks this question. So you wouldn't agree with people who say there are too many children in India? To which Mother Teresa responds, I do not agree, because God always provides. He provides for the flowers and the birds, for everything in the world that He has created. And those little children are His life. They can never be enough. Now, that sounds quite good, quite loving and caring, but in some way it can be problematic, and that's why we have this idea of separation of religion and state, because state has to provide for its citizens, and if the population goes unchecked, what to do about it? And at the same time, you'll have to see the context as well, because Bengal and Calcutta, where she lived, that saw a lot of violence over many decades. First, it was the partition of India and Pakistan, which then led to the creation of East Pakistan, now known as Bangladesh. That time there were riots, mass killings, and mass rapes. Same thing happened in the war of Bangladesh, in which it got its independence from Pakistan. Again, there were mass rapes. And then there were in the neighboring states such as Assam, and in the state itself, West Bengal, there were rapes. And if a rape victim would get pregnant, Mother Teresa would encourage that person to not abort that child. Now, in this context, it becomes really problematic. So Hitchens points out these issues and shows you the other side of the picture. But still, to these points, so far what I've discussed, many would argue that it was still out of naive humanity or some kind of goodwill out of religion and spirituality that she said and believed in these things. But then Hitchens goes a bit further and explores more instances. In one instance, he talks about the account of Dr. Robin Fox. He was also the editor of The Lancet, perhaps the world's leading medical journal, and he wanted to see the standards of care and how things were being managed there, especially in terms of medical health. And this is what his account says. There are doctors who call in from time to time, but usually the sisters and volunteers make decisions as best they can. I saw a young man who had been admitted in poor shape with high fever, and the drugs prescribed had been tetracycline and paracetamol. Later, a visiting doctor diagnosed probable malaria and substituted chloroquine. Could not someone have looked at a blood film? Investigations, I was told, are seldom permissible. How about simple algorithms that might help the sisters and volunteers distinguish the curable from the incurable? Again, no. Such systematic approaches are alien to the ethos of the home. Mother Teresa prefers providence to planning. Her rules are designed to prevent any drift towards materialism. On a short visit, I could not judge the power of their spiritual approach. But I was disturbed to learn that the formulary includes no strong analgesics. Along with the neglect of diagnosis, the lack of good analgesia marks Mother Teresa's approach as clearly separate from the hospice movement. I know which I prefer. And then Hitchens talks about another volunteer in Calcutta. She was called Mary Loudon, and this is what her account says about Mother Teresa's home care. My initial impression was of all the photographs and footage I've ever seen of Belzin and places like that, because all the patients had shaved heads, no chairs anywhere. They were just these stretcher beds. They are like First World War stretcher beds. There is no garden, no yard even, no nothing. And I thought, what is this? This is 2 rooms with 50 to 60 men in one, 50 to 60 women in another. They are dying. They're not being given a great deal of medical care. They are not being given painkillers, really beyond aspirin and maybe if you're lucky some brufen or something, for the sort of pain that goes with terminal cancer and things they were dying of. They didn't have enough drips. The needles they used and reused over and over and over, and you would see some of the nuns rinsing needles under the cold water tap. And I asked one of them why she was doing it, and she said, well, to clean it. And I said, yes, but why are you not sterilizing it? Why are you not boiling water and sterilizing your needles? She said, there is no point. There is no time. The first day I was there, when I had finished working in the women's ward, I went and waited on the edge of the men's ward for my boyfriend, who was looking after a boy of 15 who was dying. And an American doctor told me that she had been trying to treat this boy, and that he had a really relatively simple kidney complaint that had simply got worse and worse and worse because he hadn't had antibiotics, and he actually needed an operation. I don't recall what the problem was, but she did tell me. And she was so angry, but also very resigned, which so many people become in that situation. And she said, well, they won't take him to hospital. And I said, why? All you've got to do is get a cab, take him to the nearest hospital, demand that he has treatment, get him an operation. She said, they don't do it. They will not do it. If they do it for one, they'll have to do it for everybody. And I thought, this kid is 15. At this point, Hitchens provides the context to you about Mother Teresa's own life, how much money she had. So he says that bear in mind that Mother Teresa's global income is more than enough to outfit several first-class clinics in Bengal. And he goes even one step further and says that the point is not the honest relief of suffering, but the promulgation of a cult based on death and suffering and subjection. And this is something he repeatedly points out. He's showing us the real side of it. That Mother Teresa is not being inhumane when she's letting so many people die, which could have been saved. He's telling us that she's doing a service based on her beliefs, and part of that is to suffer and still keep faith in God. Like she once told a terminal patient that you're suffering like Christ on the cross, so Jesus must be kissing you. And while this sounds like a compassionate thing to say, once again Hitchens points out that we have to remember that these lives could have been saved, or at least these people could have been in a better position. They could have suffered less pain. And then Hitchens talks about a number of instances in which even the lives of her own volunteers, sisters, nuns, that could have been better. But Mother Teresa wouldn't agree, wouldn't provide them good condition. In one case, she refused to have an elevator for the handicapped. And even when the budget was being provided by the city itself, and she said no. This was unacceptable to her. And the money kept flowing in, as Hitchens points out. He says, the rich world likes and wishes to believe that someone, somewhere, is doing something for the third world. And for this reason, it does not inquire too closely into the motives or practices of anyone who fulfills, however vicariously, this mandate. The great white hope meets the great black hole. The mission to heaven blends with the comforting myth of Florence Nightingale. As ever, the true address of the missionary is to the self-satisfaction of the sponsor and the donor, and not to the needs of the downtrodden. And then he provides a lot of details of the finances of Mother Teresa. He points out about various instances where there could have been events of corruption. And even when she had millions of dollars in her account, she wouldn't pay it to the needy. If somebody needed some money urgently, as he tells certain stories, then she wouldn't help, and in fact use the funds that she had for her own organization, not for the needy, in fact. And eventually he talks about the accountability and people of the faith who spread their religion and have enormous power and wealth. Are they accountable to anybody? And do we take a closer look at what they are doing, their intentions, their actions? Often we don't. We take it for granted that they're doing some kind of charitable work in the name of God or humanity. And often we go by the reputation of the person instead of ourselves observing what they are doing. And this is something Hitchens criticizes. So in this account, he presents a strong case against Mother Teresa. And whether you are an admirer of Mother Teresa or not, you should have a look at this account and read it for yourself.